Good, that's great. And thank you all for coming out. And I have business I always have to take care of before we get started, so just hold on a second here. All right. Okay. All right, y'all are going to be on Facebook later on tonight. You're going to be on Twitter. If I knew how to do Instagram, you would be on that, but that's for somebody else. Friend me, follow me, like me. Join me on Facebook and stuff, and you can find out wonderful things. And we do like weird, spontaneous giveaways of strange things. Not that strange. Like I just got in a bunch of the Italian translation of A Sudden Light. And the foreign publishers, when they do a translation, they always send me a bunch of books. It's part of the deal. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with them, because I generally don't know people who speak that language. But so what I do is I go on and I say, hey, I got this. If anybody can add 73 and 14, write it in, and then the first person to answer correctly will get a free copy of the Italian version of A Sudden Light, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why you want to follow me on Facebook. Furthermore, this is another point of business here. This is my iPad. You do not get it. It has a picture of me climbing a redwood tree in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Oh, cool.
But what it also, stop talking at me. AT&T is calling, hold on. It also has my mailing list on it here. You can sign up for my mailing list. And I have a newsletter I send out every couple of months. And I don't share any emails or anything, but if you want to be on the newsletter, also weird things happen, like we'll do contests to a trivia contest or something, and you'll win me Skyping with your book group, for instance. So if your book group wants to read a book, I'll get them, Skype. And if you don't have a book group, I can still Skype with you. You open a bottle of wine on your side, I open a bottle of wine on my side. We have a glass of wine together, we hang out, virtually. So if you want to, you can sign up for my newsletter here afterwards. And my last order of business is the lecture that I always give. And it's going to be, I'll try and keep it as short as possible, but keep in mind I write novels, not haikus. My job as a writer isn't just to write books, it's to get people to read books. And if I could go out and put a book in everybody's hand and say, here, read this book, I would do it. But I can't. It's just too much ground to cover. For years, decades, I've been working surreptitiously to implant my deputies into your communities. And those deputies are local bookstores and libraries. These places are the best champions of writers. And so I value our local bookstores very much. And I want to just emphasize that it is important that we make sure that our libraries and our bookstores remain parts of our communities. There are a lot of easy and convenient ways to handle our lives these days, and you can go on and you can basically go online and click a button and have almost anything delivered to you, within 5 minutes, and they'll even feed you the pizza if that's what you want. But we have to remember that we have to protect our main streets. We have to make sure that our businesses remain viable places, that they stay alive, because if this lovely center were to go dark, it would be there would be no fun going for a stroll on a Saturday afternoon or wandering into your local bookstore and just picking up a random book and having that fun moment of discovery of something that you never expected to find. And that's what you can find here, and that's the value of this. In addition to many other things that bookstores provide, the way they support reading groups, the way they do kids' picture book time on Saturdays, with your libraries. It's not just about checking out books, it's also about having internet access for people who don't have a computer, and believe it or not, there are people who don't have a computer and they need access to the internet to fill out a job application or something. So we really need to vote for those levies when they come up and support our libraries, and we need to make sure to spend the extra few cents and take the extra few steps to come to our local bookstores to make sure they stay here. So enough, I told you it was going to be short, enough with my lecturing. Thanks for coming out. I wrote this book that had a dog in it. And when you do that, everything changes, because dog people are crazy. Let me guess, some of you guys are dogs people, right? I didn't realize that was going to be the reaction, quite honestly, because I didn't even think that The Art of Racing in the Rain was anything different. It was a character to me, not necessarily a dog. So I didn't understand when I wrote it, and I wrote it very quickly in 2006. As fast as I've ever written a book. I wrote the first draft in about 4 months. When I wrote it and I sent it off to my agent, I was really shocked when he called me up and said, "You can't write a book narrated by a dog. No one will read a book narrated by a dog. No publisher will publish a book narrated by a dog. No marketing department would know how to market a book narrated by a dog." And he went on and on and on at great length, and I just was stunned because I thought, that's the hang-up? It's fiction. Don't we suspend our disbelief? And he's going on. He was really funny. I remember it was right before Thanksgiving in 2006. I remember this because my in-laws were coming in from New York for a big Thanksgiving dinner, and I was getting my turkey at Whole Foods. And my in-laws, so I was getting the good organic hen. You got to get the organic, free-range hen for your mother-in-law. It's important. So I was going in again, and that's when he called. And he's going on and on. He says to me, "It's not even narrated by a dog," he said. "It's narrated by an author pretending to be a dog." I said to him, Victor Hugo wasn't a hunchback. Maybe you guys, okay, so Victor Hugo, he's a French dude, and he wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Ring a bell? Somebody got it. Anyway, it went on and on and on in this conversation, and I was like really flabbergasted. And finally, I just these two words popped into my mind, and I felt I had to say them. And so I did. I said, "You're fired." So I fired my agent. This is on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving when my in-laws were coming in for the great big Thanksgiving dinner. And let me give you a little bit of advice. If you're working on your third novel and your first two books have gotten nice reviews and stuff, but they haven't, sold a whole lot of copies, and you're working on your third novel, and let's say it's narrated from an alternative point of view, like a dog, for instance, and let's say you're going to get in a fight with your agent about this, and you're going to fire him, and it's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and your in-laws are arriving in town that afternoon. It's best not to tell your spouse about that until after Thanksgiving. Just a little helpful hint. But we did get through it. My wife and I made it through, and immediately after the weekend, I started sending the manuscript out to new agents to try and get some interest, and they all said the same thing. They said, we like the writing, we like the story, we like the writing, but it's narrated by a dog. We don't know how to sell this book. No one's going to buy this book. And it went on and on and on for months. And so now, March of 2007, I was doing a fundraiser for King County Library System up in the Northwest. And they do a big gala dinner with 30 authors, local authors, and then 30 tables, and they ring a bell after each course and the writers change. It's a very fun event. And I was at the event, I was at the pre-author dinner, and the writers were going around the table introducing each other and ourselves, and it came to me. And I said, "Hi, my name is Garth, and I'm really frustrated because I wrote this novel, and I think it's good, but it's narrated by a dog, and no agent will touch it." And this other writer sitting across from me at the table looked up from his plate, and he said, "Oh, hey, you should talk to my agent. He sold my book, and it's narrated by a crow." I don't see why he couldn't sell a book narrated by a dog. It's a true story. Lane Mayhew, he wrote a book called Song of the Crow, about a crow who stows away on Noah's Ark. So I got the agent's information, and I sent him my material on the following Monday. And 2 days later, he called me up on the phone, and he was crying. And he said, "I love this dog, I love this book, you have to let me represent this book." And that's the guy I needed, right? And so we worked on it a little bit, and then he sent it out to the publishers, and the next thing you know, he calls me up and he's like, "Okay, so there's an auction going on right now." So it became a whole, like the publisher saw it, and then it went on to 158 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's being made into a movie by Universal, theoretically. So it does prove that people will read a book narrated by a dog. So Dean Koontz did that too. Well, a lot of people have written books narrated by dogs, by the way, including Virginia Woolf, Fluke. So, what do you do then? You write a book narrated by a dog that spends a lot of time on the New York Times bestseller list. Then what? because all anybody wants, all they wanted me to write was a book narrated by a cat who loved the idea of flight and really just honored birds because they have such graceful motion and studied birds. And when the other cats in the neighborhood wanted to eat the birds, this cat would defend the birds. And the cat had, the master of the cat, the owner of the cat is a small plane pilot, right? He has a little plane, a little Cessna 150, right? And he flies back and forth up to the San Juan Islands. And he takes the cat with him. And when he flies, the cat studies the controls. He's an older guy. And one day they're coming back from San Juan Island, and he has a heart attack on the airplane. They're landing at Boeing Field. And the guy loses contact with the control tower, and the cat puts his ear to the and kind of breathes into the mic. So the guy in the control tower knows that someone is in the airplane, but no one's responding. So he figures it must be someone who just can't speak, and he'll guide them down. So the guy in the control tower guides the plane down. The cat flies. The medics meet the plane, and they pull the guy out. They resuscitate him. They take him off to the hospital, and the cat is left there. And no one knows who landed the plane except the guy in the control tower. He knows who landed the plane. And it's called Catbird Seat. Yeah, I didn't write that. Not because I couldn't have, but because that's not the way I like to work as a writer. I've written 4 books. I'm working on my 5th. They all are very similar thematically. If you've read more than one of them, you see the idea of redemption, the idea of coming to terms with our past. There's always a father-son element apparently in them, that apparently I have something unresolved, which is an interesting story we'll get to in a second. But I didn't want to do the same book over and over and over again. I always want to do something new and try something new and fun, and hopefully take you on a ride with some ups and downs, some peaks and valleys, and some laughs and some tears, and then a nice catharsis at the end, like that catharsis you felt the first time you read Charlotte's Web when you were a kid. And we all read it, I know, and we all cried, so don't deny it. That's the goal, that feeling of, oh gosh, I love these characters, can't I please spend more time with them? But no, you can't. That's part of the experience of reading a book. That's what makes a book so wonderful. So it came to time for me to come up with an idea for a book, and I'm going to do that. And I had written a play in 2004 called Brother Jones, kind of on a whim. I was between books. My second book was in the pipeline. It was going to be coming out in the next spring, and so I wanted to write something. I had some nervous energy and stuff, so I wrote a book under weird circumstances. My 2 older kids were obviously younger, 10 years younger, and so they'd go to bed at whatever, 8:30 or something, and then I'd go into my office and I'd work. I'd put on REM's Life's Rich Pageant on autoplay over and over and over again, and I'd write, and it was about this. I wanted the house, the set, to be a character. That it was this old, creepy house that would sigh and moan and groan in the play. And the characters would interact kind of with the house, and it was kind of a ghost story, kind of American Gothic kind of thing. Timber, it's set in Aberdeen, Washington. And I really enjoyed writing that. It had 1 production in Los Angeles in 2005. Got nice reviews. LA Weekly had something really nice to say about it, which was kind of cool. But I knew there was something a little bit wrong with it. And it would have taken tearing it down and bringing it back and workshopping and working with actors, really devoting a lot of time to take it to the next level. And I didn't have time because I had the idea about a book narrated by a dog. So I got distracted by The Art of Racing in the Rain. Then I said, you know what? When it came time for the new book, what I want to do is revisit these characters and come back, because there's something about the story I really enjoyed. And that's when I started to do A Sudden Light. It's a multi-generational family saga set in the Northwest against the Northwest timber industry, the history of the Northwest timber industry. It's about fathers and sons and that relationship and how it ripples through generations of a family. It's about our connection with nature. And it mostly, though, what I like, it's got a little bit of a spiritual element to it. Some people have called it a ghost story, but it's not The Haunting of Hill House. There's nothing scary about it. It's a spiritual story. It's a story about being open to looking beyond, to seeing the unseen, to peeling back the layers. You know, we have these ideas of luck and coincidence that we always say, oh yeah, well, it just happened, it was random, and this just happened in our favor randomly. I don't believe in that. I find that when you talk about luck, especially if you talk about something like athletics, they always talk about, oh, lucky shot. I find the people who work the hardest tend to be really lucky. Michael Jordan was really lucky. He worked the hardest. And so often, luck and coincidence are things that happen and we don't maybe think we deserve the good fortune, or maybe we didn't do anything to deserve it, you know, to have it come to us, or maybe there are connections in there that we just don't see. You know, when you start looking at particle physics and, you know, all these sorts of things, string theory and all these sorts of things, that everything is connected, everything is intertwined, and that, you know, they're not just 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions, add time, you get 4 dimensions, then you start thinking about the 5th dimension, which is this whole weird geometrical thing, and then when you get to Stephen Hawking and he's talking about 18 dimensions, we just can't see 13 of them. So this is all very fascinating. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes, what dark matter really is. And I always like to play with that in the book, and I tried to do that in this, using a spiritual story. It starts in, the story is being told by adult Trevor. He's telling the story to his children and his wife. He brings them back to a place, the North Estate, in Seattle, just north of Seattle, a very wealthy enclave built by the founders of Seattle with great, huge mansions. And he tells the story to his family of what happened to him when he was brought there for the very first time when he was 14 years old by his father. The Riddell family, Trevor's family, was once a very wealthy, a very influential timber baron family, since fallen from grace, and all they have left is this gigantic crumbling mansion on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound. When Trevor was 14 and goes there, he's confused. Let me try and set the scene for you, and then I just want to read you one passage, and then we can just talk and chat about all sorts of different things. So imagine this. You're Trevor Riddell. You're 14 years old, 1990, so it's pre-digital. You don't have no cell phones, no Xboxes, no iPads, none of that. Your parents you're an only child, and your parents are on the verge of getting divorced. In fact, they are starting a trial separation. Your mother, who's originally from England, has gone back to her family, and so she's over on the other side of the ocean. Your father has brought you back to Seattle, because you've grown up in Connecticut. Very nice, lovely little rural lifetime in Connecticut. You've been brought back to Seattle by your father, to this place where your father grew up. But your father's never told you anything about his upbringing, about his parents, about his grandparents, about his family. So you know very little about it. He's a very reticent man. He brings you to this house and you think, oh, whatever, we're just going to go see this house. You come around the bend after this long, windy road through the woods, and there's a clearing that opens up and you see this house. It's immense. It's the biggest house you've ever seen. It's made of giant whole trees standing side by side, like some kind of weird centuries that hold up this gigantic roof and all these fireplaces. And as you get closer, you see that it's really crumbling, it's falling apart, the paint around the window frames is all coming off and peeling back, and it's creaky and it's listing to one side. And you go inside the house and it smells of mold and dust, and it's all kind of dark, and but clearly everything's very elaborate and very expensive, the oriental rugs in all the rooms. And you look into the one parlor, the gentleman's parlor to the right, and there's ornate lion endirons. And next to the fireplace is a 8-foot-tall portrait of a man, an old guy, holding a cane, and he's got wild white hair, and he's reaching out his hand from the painting as if to pull you in. And your father comes up behind you and says, "That's Elijah Riddell, your great-great-grandfather. He's the one who built this house." So you walk to the back of the house through the long hallway and you get back to the kitchen, this huge kitchen that was used to feed all these people. And then you meet your Aunt Serena for the first time. When your father told you you had an aunt who you've never met, by the way, never even spoken to on the phone, never had any correspondence, when your father said that you had an aunt, you thought, oh, well, she's probably like Mrs. Doubtfire, you know, oh, okay, little munchkin, I'm going to make you some tea. But no, your aunt is 34 years old and she's smoking hot. And she is all over the place. She's got such these affectations, you just confuse your little 14-year-old mind. You can imagine how, at 14, a super hot aunt could confuse you. So everything she does is like a game that she's playing with you. And then you go out onto the front porch and you meet for the first time your grandfather, Grandpa Samuel. Grandpa Samuel looks kind of like the guy in the painting, long, kind of crazy hair. And he's sitting there, he's wearing all black, even though he's sitting in the blazing sun. And he's got a black t-shirt on. And you look closely at the words on his t-shirt, and the words say, God was my co-pilot, but then we crashed in the mountains and I had to eat him.
Oh.
And you say, that's funny. And he says, what? It's on your shirt. And he says, oh, Serena dresses me. So imagine how weird this place can be. Let me just read you, I gotta read you two passages, because you gotta hear this is really funny. And this will give you a reason why I passed out matches. And if you didn't get matches but want some, there's plenty more here. Okay, so this is the first dinner at Riddell House after arriving. Serena has created an elaborate dinner, even though there are just 4 of them there. There's tons and tons of food. And the only thing you have to know before I read this is Grandpa Samuel refuses to eat the chicken because chicken has tendons. I don't know either. But you should know that going in. Where were we, Serena asked, rolling her eyes. Oh yes, the question of haunting. Jones, haven't you had the talk with Trevor? What's the talk? I asked. The talk about states of being, states of awareness. We had the talk around the dinner table nightly when your father and I were young. Our mother lectured us about it incessantly. I mean, there's so much we don't know. How can we consider ourselves to know anything at all? Daddy, I really must insist that you eat some chicken. Serena picked up a piece of fried chicken with her tongs and placed it on Grandpa Samuel's plate. He recoiled and shoved the thigh off his plate and onto the tabletop. Is there an entity in this house? I asked. Define entity, Serena said. We must use the proper nomenclature. Terminology can be confusing unless we're agreed on the definitions. Knock it off, Serena, my father growled. For real, you're scaring him. Oh, I think Trevor knows more than you're giving him credit for. He's the one who asked. Serena stood up and grabbed a box of matches from the counter. Thus, the matches. Next to the big old-fashioned stove, she dropped the box on the table before me and then resumed her seat. There are all sorts of hiding places in this house, she said. When Riddell House was built, there were many things to be afraid of. Not Indians, of course. The Northwest Coast natives were a docile lot, happily trading with each other and white men alike. But there were bandits and thieves who targeted the very rich. They would kidnap and ransom family members when they could. At least that's what Elijah believed, though he was a noted misanthrope, so grains of salt should be taken as necessary. Nevertheless, this house was designed with secret passages and places to hide, so Elijah could feel safe. They called them priest holes, a term held over from the Reformation in England, when Catholics would hide their priests from the Protestant establishment. Do you know what they did when they discovered a priest hiding in the walls during the Reformation? What did they do? I asked. They hanged him, or they burned him alive. A good hanging has its drama, but there's nothing like the scent of burning flesh lingering in the air to roust a priest or two from his hidey hole, I'm sure you can imagine. Serena, my father scolded. There's a secret stairway in Riddell House, Serena continued without a pause. I don't know where. It's a secret, isn't it, Jones? A secret you shared with Mother. I was too young to be allowed in on the secret. There's a hidden stairway, Trevor, and if you find it and strike a match, you will see an apparition in the sudden flash of light. The ghost of Riddell House. But we shouldn't talk about this. It upsets Daddy. Daddy finds talk of spirits very disturbing. You remember the night Daddy took the axe to the stairs, don't you, Brother Jones? Oh, I shouldn't have come here, my father grumbled, exasperated. Perhaps not, Serena agreed. And yet you're here. You came here with some amount of deliberation. You didn't fall through the floorboards and find yourself at Riddell House. You got on a plane. You checked luggage. You rented a car. Daddy, please put your chicken back on your plate and eat it. Eat all of it, tendons included, or else you will weaken, fall, and break your hip. And studies show that once mobility is diminished by a broken hip, life expectancy is greatly decreased. So that gives you an idea of how Serena controls the conversation. She keeps everybody going different directions, and she's always in charge of it. So that's sort of the setup of the book. From there, where does it go? 14-year-old kid in 1990. His father is reticent at best. His aunt is always playing games with him. His mother is a distant phone call away in a different time zone in England. And his grandfather may or may not have dementia. So who can tell him the truth about his family history? So he starts to explore. He starts to see what's up in this house. And he starts discovering some of these secret passages. He starts discovering some journals and some diaries and some letters. And he realizes there is someone else in the house, a spirit. And maybe that spirit is someone he can trust. So I just want to read this brief, it's only a page long here, from this far into the book. It's chapter 30. I never used chapter titles before, but I really enjoyed doing it with this. So there's a lot of little references and literary kind of things in there. Chapter 30 is called Behold This Dreamer, which is the title of a collection of poems by Walter de la Mare, who, of course, had a lot of spiritual and magically realistic things in his poetry. We were more than a week into our stay, 10 days by the calendar, and I had taught myself how to walk down the long hallways without making a sound. I had familiarized myself with all the stairways that were obvious and some that were not, back stairs in front, servant stairs in front of house. I had found linen closets with hidden panels to store things. What was stored in those places over the decades I didn't know. I understood Riddell House in a way I could only describe as fundamental. Sometimes, when I walked down the long corridor at night and ventured into the south wing, I felt as if I had become the house. The house told me when to turn, where to go next, what to discover. And when I stopped in a room during my nightly explorations, I always knew Ben was there with me, because I breathed with measured breaths and I didn't move a gram of body weight. I made no sound. I waited until Ben's shallow breath fell out of sync with mine and I could hear us both breathing. I didn't want anything from Ben but the truth. He was there when my grandmother died. He knew what happened between my father and his mother and father, and he seemed to be the only one who was willing to tell me anything. I stood in a room that was entirely empty except for a bare mattress on a metal frame. The moon shone across the water and tickled the ceiling and walls with flecks of light. I heard Ben's breath independent of my own, so I knew he was with me. He placed a hand on my shoulder and leaned toward me so I could feel his phantom weight, and he whispered my name. "Tell me," I said, but he said nothing. That night, I had another dream. So what happens is the spirit of his great-great-granduncle, Benjamin Riddell, starts coming to him. He's inhabiting this house. And he first starts coming to him in dreams, giving him dreams that have the history, parts of the history of the Riddell family, things that Trevor couldn't possibly know from any other source. And this idea occurred to me when I was starting to write this book. I told you I wrote it as a play, and then I started working on it as a novel. So when you're writing a novel, at least when I'm writing a novel, it starts with an idea that I have, and I'm trying to do something. And then the idea starts to gain ballast, and at a certain point, it becomes about the idea. It becomes about the characters and about the book. It's not about me anymore. And then I'm at the service of the story. And my job is to make sure it comes out in a way that readers enjoy and it makes sense. But I can't tell the characters what's going on. And that's a lot of that happened in this book. In 2009, in the early stages of writing the novel of this, my father got ill, and after a few weeks in the hospital, he died. I got caught up in the business of death, as happens. I'm sure some of you may have had that experience. You know, my mother was, of course, distraught, so I was dealing with her, and my sister lives down near Glendale here in California, so she was kind of not really involved. So I dealt with all the stuff, and there's a lot of stuff when this thing happens. So maybe I wasn't really dealing with the immediacy of his death as much as I was dealing with putting that off, perhaps. So it was somewhat surprising, but also not, I guess, that a few months later I had a series of dreams. There were 4 dreams in a row, and they were all different. They were short. They were very clear, and they were not repetitive in any way. And in these dreams, my father came to me, and we'd have a brief conversation about stuff, about big life things, about nothing, about little nothing things. And then at the end, he'd get up and walk off. And after the fourth night, he went away, and that was it. I haven't seen old Marvin again. Now, we love to use science to explain stuff in this world. We crave it, the easy explanation. So we can use that in this case if you want to take that track. You could say, well, I was traumatized over the death of my father, and I was processing that, and I had a piece of tainted pepperoni pizza, and my synapses were randomly firing, and it's all in my head, just what happens. Or we could look at it the way I prefer to look at it. See, because I've told this story now since September 30th when the book came out, and at every reading, people come up to me and say, but it wasn't really a dream, right? It didn't seem like a dream. I mean, it was a lot clearer, wasn't it? And you remember it, don't you? And I said, yes. And they say, I've had that. Because it makes sense to me that, in a dream state, in our sleep state, our walls are down, right? We don't have our skepticism, our native skepticism that we carry around with us all the time, doubting everything. So we're open to new things in our sleep. And so what's the easiest way for a spirit to reach out to us, except in that state where we're open and they don't have to create any physical manifestation? There's no cold breath that has to breeze through. There's no door that has to slam, no bell that has to ring, no creak of a hardwood floor. They just have to appear, and we're open for it. And so I believe my father did die abruptly. He died before his time. He was 75. He walked 4 miles a day and did yoga twice a week. He wasn't the guy who was going to die. So maybe there was something unresolved, or he wanted to give me something more, and he did. And when he was done, he went about his journey, and that's the way it goes. So I put that in the book. The book I dedicated, if you've seen it, it's dedicated to my dead father. For my dead father, it says. And my publisher called me up when I said that. He's like, oh, you sure you want to do that? It sounds a little angry. And I said, well, it is a little angry. I mean, he shouldn't be dead. I mean, honestly, there's a little bit of anger in there. But at the same time, I want to portray the idea that, everybody's father obviously influences them in their life and in our lives. But in the making of this book, my father influenced me greatly in his death and then in his after death. And I wanted to bring that into the book. That's why Benjamin reaches out to Trevor in the dreams to begin. And that convinces Trevor that this may be something. It gives him the ability to be very open to where he actually does have an actual encounter with the spirit himself. He has more than one. So that's the book. It's A Sudden Light. I hope you enjoy it. If you have already read it, I do appreciate that. And I'd love to hear what you think about it. We did this really cool website, and if you want to grab one of these cards, it's a reminder card. asuddenlight.com is a standalone website. So there's my website that has stuff about news things and stuff that I do. But then this is just about the book. And it has this artist's rendition of the North Estate where the book takes place. And if you hover over the different buildings, the little pop-up window happens and you can click on it for more information about all sorts of things. The tree magic and adventure of tree climbing. I did some, there's a video of me climbing a 800-year-old redwood tree last summer, which was totally cool. The history of the Northwest timber barons. There is an early 20th century gay relationship in A Sudden Light. And so I found that fascinating world to research, and so there's some information about what it was like to be in a gay relationship around the turn of the 20th century. The word gay wasn't used, by the way. No. That's a very modern term. Spirituality, spiritualism proper, in those days, around the turn of the 20th century, everybody had a medium. It was very commonplace. And there's stuff in the book about this too. Gifford Pinchot, who was Teddy Roosevelt's forestry lieutenant, who created the whole national parks idea. Gifford Pinchot, his wife died of tuberculosis. His fiancée died of tuberculosis, and then he married her anyway. And he sat at a table. He had dinners with her every night for years, and went for long walks with her and consulted her. And no one said, "Oh, Giff has gone off the edge." They're like, All right, I guess if it works for you, man. Our way we think about spirituality has evolved. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff, and if you want to grab one of these cards, you can. If you didn't get matches and buttons, you can. And if you want to sign up this, you can. And if you have any questions, we can do that. Questions? Come on, I know you have questions. Yes, ma'am.
I forget now, but I don't think you're a native of the Pacific Northwest. When did you get there?
That's right.
And I am a native, and I think you write marvelously about my country.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. You're going to love this. This next one has got all sorts of weird stuff in it about Northwest and the Cascade Mountains and all that kind of stuff. I actually was born in Los Angeles. I grew up, I was born in, what's the big hospital, Mount Sinai? No. Cedar-Sinai. Grew up in the valley.
Where in the valley?
I grew up at 13930 Khalifa Street, Van Nuys, California.
Canoga Park.
See? But only till when at 7 years old, we moved to Seattle. My father is a good old Jewish kid from Brooklyn, and my mother is from Wrangell, Alaska, a really small fishing village. And so she's Tlingit and Irish, Tlingit Indian and Irish. And she made her way to New York when she was young and single. And then she wanted to see the world, so she got a job with the Army doing running a nightclub on a Army base in the 50s in Bindlach, Germany, which is right near Bayreuth, which is the home of the Wagner Festival. Coincidentally, my father, who didn't know her at the time, was drafted into the Army and drove tanks on this Army base. And he fell in love with her when she was singing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend in the nightclub. And they came back to New York, and then so they met in Germany, and they lived in New York for a while. And then my sister and I were born in California because my father moved there for a job. And then we moved to Seattle because my mother had 9 brothers and sisters from Alaska. And trust me, if you've ever been to Wrangell, Alaska, I mean, God bless you. And it's a wonderful place for 16 hours. And you're like, because when there's one restaurant that's open for dinner, one restaurant, and it's an island. It's not even like you can go to the next town. So everybody left. Most of them came down to Seattle. So I had a ton of aunts and uncles growing up in Seattle. So I grew up in Seattle. I call that my hometown because from 7 to 18, those are the formative years, I think. And I lived in New York then for 18 years after that, went to school there and stayed. And then my wife and I moved back with our 2 older kids, who were 3 and 5, in 2001. We moved into our house that we're living in now in Seattle on September 9th, 2001. How weird is that? My mother-in-law called me up on 9/11 and she said, you better turn on the TV. I said, literally everything is in boxes. We don't have a TV. And she said, you better get to one. So I went to the Radio Shack and I bought rabbit ears and we watched The Second Tower, which was really bizarre for my kids. They couldn't quite figure it out. If you know Seattle at all, we live in the Mount Baker area, so on the west side of Lake Washington. On the other side of the lake is Bellevue. And my 3-year-old at the time would look across and he'd say, is that where the bad men flew into the building? It's like, a little further, a little bit further. But it was really bizarre. It was kind of like leaving the world and really burning it down and starting over again. So, but, that's what life takes us through, these adventures, right? Yes, ma'am.
Are you ever surprised by where your characters go? Like you have sort of a picture in your mind and then your characters just turn in a different direction? Yeah,
I am. And everybody hear that question? If I'm ever surprised about the characters? Very much. I mean, I was a big theater person and I went to film school and studied screenwriting. So I don't do screenwriting. It doesn't work for me, but I've learned a lot of structure. And I really believe in the dramatic structure. I love the idea of a model, of having a map, a goal. I need to know where I'm going, but I always have to be ready to change that map because that map is my idea and the characters in the story start to tell you where they're going to go. And woe be the author who forces his characters to go someplace they don't belong, because that's the book that you get 2/3 of the way through and you're like, I love this book, it's rocking, man, this is great. And then something happens, you're like, wait, what? No, I don't buy it. And you read a few more pages, and that's the book you set down on your bedside table and you don't pick up again. because the writer tried to contrive for something to happen for convenience, to make the story end. When in fact you have to, if you wanted that to happen there, you got to change something back here so that the reader can track it and believe it, right? So I always am listening for what's going to happen, what random things they do. In the play of Brother Jones, the play of this book, Grandpa Samuel was a mean son of a bitch. I mean, he was a nasty guy, and he stayed nasty all throughout. And I thought that's who he was. Interestingly, in the play, there was no Trevor. The narrator of the book wasn't in the play, which was one of the problems with the play. But I didn't realize Trevor and Grandpa Samuel formed this weird alliance of kind of like the misfits in a weird way, and they bonded. And it turned out Grandpa Samuel was a really kind of cool guy, cool, funny, neat. I mean, I really liked the way Samuel changed as I learned who he was. That surprised me in a way. It was a good way. So yeah. Surely everyone has questions about the art of racing in the rain. Yes.
Part of it, that's
Yeah.
what it is. But you speak a lot about spirituality, and I just finished reading the dog book, and I noticed that there's a lot of spirituality in there,
Yeah.
and a lot of like this thought of how we behave and all this stuff. Where does that come from for you?
So yeah, the spirituality. I mean, look, I grew up as I've already told you. I have a very mixed bag background. My mother Episcopalian, with a dash of Tlingit Indian, and my father kind of a Jewish kid who broke rank because he married a goy, and his father wouldn't talk to him for years because of that. Eventually came around, but it was a big stress. So we weren't raised with religion, my sister and I. Although for some reason my mother we had to get baptized Unitarian for the sake of, you have to be baptized something, I think my mother thought. It was kind of weird. The only thing the Unitarians taught me was how to make origami balloons that you could fill with water and throw at people. So Sunday school, I don't know.
No, I've never done this before. I don't know what that is. I'm sorry. It's so embarrassing. What is that? I'm so sorry. I've never done that before.
Oh my God.
Out of control.
Don't worry about it. Relax. So in terms of the spirituality and stuff, the idea of, in the art of racing in the rain, I don't know if you know how the whole thing came together. I used to make documentaries before I wrote my first book. I wrote my first book, I guess it came out when I was 32. So for 10 years I worked in different jobs for a Broadway producer and also in the film industry. And at some point when I was making documentaries, a film came across my desk. They were looking for distribution in the US. It was made in Mongolia, and it was called State of Dogs. And it was about this belief, and it's in the book, in the Art of Racing in the Rain, the belief among the nomadic people of Mongolia that the next incarnation for the dog is going to be as a person. So they treat their dog in a very special way, and they have this special death ritual, burial ritual, and stuff. And I couldn't get involved with the film for a number of reasons, but the idea really stuck with me. The idea of, like, wouldn't it be cool if we would see our loved ones again, and in a different form, that maybe we could talk back to them, sort of thing. But I didn't know how do you use that story? I couldn't figure it out, so I just kind of tucked it away. And then I was at in 2006, I was at a reading of Billy Collins. Do you guys know Billy Collins,
Yeah.
the poet? He's really terrific. If you have a chance to see him, you've really got to go. He's hysterical. He's very funny. He's got a real deadpan delivery, and his poems are lovely, and then they always have a little twist at the end to make you laugh. And he looks a little bit like a really tall Bob Newhart. You know? Anybody who laughed is officially old. Because your kids don't know who Bob Newhart is, trust me. But I know who Bob Newhart is. Remember the show with the Suzanne Plachette and the pilot dude who lived in the hall? Anyway, he got up and he was reading his poetry, and he read one of his poems called The Revenant, which means words from the dead. So it's told from the point of view of a dog who's recently been euthanized. So it's being narrated from doggy heaven. And the first line of the poem is this: I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing: I never liked you. It's very funny. Trust me. I'm sure it's in a collection called The Trouble with Poetry, and I bet they have a copy here. So, yeah, you should get it. It's a very funny poem. Anyway, I heard him reading this poem, and I just like, whoa, that's it. That's my dog. See, because the idea of a dog being reincarnated as a person has to be told from the dog's point of view. Like, I'm the smartest person in the room, but no one will listen to me because I'm trapped in this body and I don't have thumbs, I can't turn doorknobs, and my tongue won't make words. Other than that, I'm better than all of you. And even with it, I'm still faster than you all right now anyway. And so Enzo started out as a very, very kind of acerbic and acrid, bitter, sort of resentful character. And then as I wrote the book, and this is one of those things, how the character evolves, he became the Enzo. He wasn't all that. He wasn't nearly as angry as Billy Collins' dog. But that's how the whole idea started, with the idea of incarnation, reincarnation, and all that. I happened to be doing some amateur race car driving at the time. I raced SCCA, Sports Car Club of America. I raced a Spec Miata for a few years. I actually was the points champion in 2003 in the Northwest region. Thank you. I showed up to every race and no one else did. Hey, you got to show up to win points. Just saying. So I had a great time doing it, but people at the track really talk like Enzo talks. You know, they use these like little aphorisms and stuff. You know, your car goes where your eyes go, and fast hands in the slow stuff and slow hands in the fast stuff, and all these kinds of things. And me and my buddies we'd joke around about it, because all these ideas in racing that you can never worry about something that's already happened or that just happened because you can't change it. You can only worry about what's there. So don't waste any time thinking about that. You have to focus all of your energy on how to better your position. And we would jokingly say, you know, if we could apply the rules of racing to our lives as people, we'd be like really good people. Because you wouldn't like get mad at anybody ever. You wouldn't like blame, you know, there wouldn't be any defensiveness about stuff. And so that's where that all came together at the same time. And that's what writing a book is. It's like making a stew. You know, you add ingredients a little bit at a time. And if you do it right, hopefully you build the flavor so that when you get to the end, after your 2.5 hours of working on it, it's delicious. But you can't identify one particular flavor. It's all goes in there. So, yes, sir.
You just answered my question, but I gotta share something with you, because I wanted to know about the racing part. You know, I wandered through this bookstore years ago and bought Art of Racing in the Rain because of the cover. I bought a nice signed copy. You must have just been here. And put it on the bookshelf, because I'm a dog person who will never read a book that's got a dog in it, because something bad might happen to the dog. And so finally my wife, you know, after you've been on the, you know, bestseller list for like 9 years or something, my wife said, you really ought to read that book. So I did, but it's, for me, I wanted to know where you got the racing part, because I grew up in a harness racing family.
Oh, okay.
Also a Jewish dad who married a shiksa. We didn't call her a guy. Well, we love our mom. But my first question was going to be, how bad did your Jewish grandmother take all this? But anyways, I'll leave that one alone, because I've got one too, or had one. But so much of your understanding of racing spoke to me, even though I've never raced cars. Our family is a harness racing family, where we're drivers,
right?
You know, not jockeys.
Yeah.
We drive harness horses.
Yeah. That's...
but I have posted like several pages in the driver's room, because there's a place where you're restricted. The stewards post rulings, and other people post rules about the whip, rules about driver infractions. I posted like about 5 pages from your book in there. Irritated. They don't even know what the book is. You know, I would cut the pages from a paperback copy and highlight it, particularly page 91, where you were just talking about, you know, if something goes wrong, you can't blame the other drivers. You made the decisions.
Yeah.
I was dying to ask you, where do you get that insight into racing? But now I know. But,
yeah.
Yeah, it
Oh, great.
shows. It shows.
No, harness
yeah.
racing, that's very cool.
Yeah, but it's funny because some people do, oh, that's the dog book. I think of it as all about racing. I mean, I love the dog part, don't get me wrong, but
Well, just
the
so you know,
racing
the whole
part
thing
is
about
brilliant.
the dog, people always say, oh, I don't want to read a dog book because, the dog always dies at the end. That's why I killed Enzo off in the first chapter.
Yeah.
If you notice, the first chapter ends as, Enzo's like, I don't know if this is going any longer. I think this is it. And then basically over the night, if you were to sort of structure it out, at least my thought is the first chapter, and then over the course of the night, he has a full memory of his entire life. He recounts for us his entire life, wakes up in the morning, dies. So I knew you knew in the beginning that he wasn't going to make it. And I figured, get that out of the way. Let's have some fun. Yes, Beth.
Thank you. I have a question about each book, if I may.
Oh, yes,
so
please.
allow. This book, you mentioned that Art of Racing in the Rain was one of the fastest books to write. So
Yeah.
I was just curious, in comparison, this is a longer book.
Yeah.
How long this book took to write? And a second part question, do you personally believe in spirits and in God and in the things that you wrote about in this book?
Okay. So to answer the first question, which is how long did it take me to write A Sudden Light? It took a long time. It took. When you start the clock. I grew up in a neighborhood in North Seattle, just down the hill from a place called the Highlands, which is what I based the North Estate on. The Highlands is a very wealthy enclave where all the biggest timber barons built their mansions right at the turn of the 20th century. And the Olmsted brothers did all the land. It's a very exclusive neighborhood. And I grew up across the creek from that, always looking at these mansions and wondering who the heck lives there. So theoretically, I started writing this when I was 7. But you build up stuff, right? So I started working on the novel proper in 2009. And I was writing it, I envisioned it very much the way it turned out. And I started to write it, but it wasn't working. And I was giving parts of it to my wife to read. My wife is my first reader and my best, most loyal editor, and really kind of the silent partner of my books. And she's like, it's okay, I don't need credit on the cover or anything. But she really is really good with structure. Sometimes I don't see some things, and she can just say, well, if you do this and move that, then... So she very much collaborates with me. So I was giving her the early pages, and she's like, I don't think you're making sense. It's not holding water. It's not. There's no ballast to it. And she said, why don't you try writing it from 1890, from the beginning of your story, 1890 in Portland, Oregon, and then bring the family up through Aberdeen and write. And then when you know all that, then we can see, how are we going to tell this? How are you going to structure it in the final, right? So I said, good idea. So I started to write this. I wrote the story from Elijah Riddell starting in St. Paul and moving across the country, and how Benjamin was born. All these, and I wrote and I wrote and I worked on it. Not just like gibberish. I was like working on it and polishing it and rewriting it for 2.5 years. I got 100,000 words of the story, and I thought, this is, and she was like, it's good. And I was like, I know it's good, it's good. I sent it to my editor at Simon & Schuster, and she's like, wait, what? That's not what you told us the book was going to be. The book is about this family now, and this and this and this, not about all this. I said, oh, yeah, that's part 1. And now I'm going to write part 2. And she's like, your part 1 is 100,000 words, which is, by the way, a long book. This is 120,000 words. And how long is your part 2 going to be? I said, another 60, 80,000. She's like, so your book's going to be like this thick, and I was like, oh my God, that's not what I was hoping for. And I really kind of crashed for a while because you spend 2.5 years working on something to be told it's not. And so I went into my little weird zone. And actually, we were in New York visiting my in-laws in the summer, and we were flying back, and my wife and I were the kids were all on their iPads, which is the most wonderful invention, by the way. Don't tell anybody I said that, because I know it's bad parenting, but it's good for sanity. And my wife and I were having a glass of wine, and have a glass of wine on an airplane? You know, you get that weird altitude euphoria thing going on. Like everything is better, and that's why you're crying on. Like you'll cry any book you pick up on an airplane. You're gonna have a glass of wine. I love it so much. Any movie, even the worst, like Robert Downey Jr. bad movie, you're going to be crying at. And so we were up there, and I had this, and I said, I think I know. And she said, what? I said, well, I got to throw it away. I mean, I got to take it all, and I have to set it aside, and I have to rewrite it. And she's like, but you did all that work, and I was like, and that's good work. But it's not in the book work. That was homework. That was studying. That was pre-writing. I did 2.5 years of pre-writing to learn about the characters because I knew everything about them. And then I could write the story that was this. But I had to do that homework first. So, what was the question?
Got it.
How long did it take you? Does anyone
Oh, how long was it? Oh, then it took me another 2 years to write the.
Right.
It took me a year and a half. I got the next one done, and I sent it to them, and they were like, "Oh!" I sent it to my editor. She's like, "Oh, I get it now." And so then we did some rewriting. So then it went quickly once I realized that again, a writer has to set aside his ego. Just because I spent a lot of time writing, see what happens when I teach young writers is they think every word they write is supposed to be precious and it's supposed to be gold, and it isn't. It just isn't. Gold is not, to get gold, you have to like go and hit the rocks and you have to sift through the creeks and get the little flecks. And eventually, after a long time, you get enough gold to make something. Very rarely, and sometimes it does happen, you find a big nugget. Okay, good for you. If you do that, God bless you. But usually, you have to work hard for it. And it was same thing with writing. To get the gold, you have to write a lot of stuff you're going to throw away and do it because that stuff is teaching you how to write your book. So it took me 5.5 years to write this. So,
And then there was the second part,
which was
do you personally, you
Oh.
wrote some very beautiful
Yeah.
passages on
Yes.
spirituality and beings and, when
Yes, I
you
do.
came to, like,
I
that's
believe
when
I believe absolutely that this is one manifestation for our soul material. I don't think we maybe go off as discrete individual souls that then come back, I don't stay Garth when I go off into my death, but parts are always floating around, and that's why I think we have visions sometimes. We have memories that we don't know where they're coming from. These are little bits of other people, other lives that we've experienced and that we have a certain amount of access to. We probably can train ourselves to have greater access. That in itself takes quite a bit of discipline, but some people can. Some people can't and make it up, but that's bad. But I do believe there's a lot of stuff. I mean, look, my son, my 16-year-old is as cynical as they get. There was an experience when he was a kid where like a ghost spirit thing was in the corner and like pinned him to the bed, and there was this whole big thing, and we had a lot of talk about it, and he swears to this day, he's like, "Oh, are you kidding me? They're absolutely are spirits." And sometimes we have encounters with them and we don't get it. So I think we should walk around being open to see. You're laughing. You had a question. And then we're going to have to stop. And we could go on all night, but you got to ask them. Or if you guys are bored or something, or if you got to go, we should probably stop. But how about we have one more question, then let me sign people's books, and then anybody wants to hang out afterwards or whatever.
So my question was
Yes.
sort of piggybacking with part one of the previous question.
Yes.
Was Trevor part of the 100,000 word first draft, or how did you decide where to begin?
Oh, yeah.
The arc of the story after you.
That's a good question. Was Trevor part of my back history? No, he wasn't.
Wow.
I don't know if I had conceived of him yet when I was writing that. I was really concentrating mostly on what happened was I was writing about the Elijah, and then who was Elijah and how was he driven and so forth. And then he has this son Ben in kind of an unconventional fashion. In a sense, it's an arranged heir. And then he sends his son off to be trained to be just like him, because that's all, as fathers, all we want is our kids to be just like us, right? But they don't actually want to be us, do they? So he sends Ben off to Yale to get educated properly, and what happens? He gets corrupted by those awful transcendentalists who have all these horrible ideas about how we're all connected, and God is in nature, and nature is in us, and God is in us, and we are all, and Ben sees all things anew, and now is at kind of loggerheads with his. So that then Ben meets Harry and all that stuff. That was all in the beginning. And there's a lot more about Abraham and some of these other borderline characters that only get a mention in this book. There's tons of material on it, strangely enough. But we have to be ruthless as writers in creating the best book we can possibly write. And that means cutting stuff, even if you spent a lot of time working on it. It's not about you. And I always said, I'm not going to publish a book. You know, it took a long time to write this book, and I know people wanted to have another book quicker maybe. My publisher certainly did, my agent certainly did, but I always said I wouldn't put out a book until I could actually stand up in front of a room full of people and say, this is the best book I've ever written. And if I can't say that, then I'm cheating me and you, because I'm asking you for a lot. I'm asking you not only to put down money for a book, I need your time, and I need your attention, and I want you to read it carefully. And if this isn't the best thing I could have written, then I've broken a trust. I have to let you know that this is going to give you something at the end, and not just be, another one of those, that you want to keep it and hold on to it. So I won't ever publish a book until I can literally say it's the best thing I've ever written. And I can stand before you now and say, and by the way, next time I come back in how many years? Hopefully just a couple, because I'm already starting my new book. It's so funny. It's going to be really, you guys are going to love it.
Did you feel that way though, that was the best book you ever read was your first draft? That's too long. Didn't you feel that way?
Did I feel it was the same way with the first draft? I was a little bit deluding myself. I knew.
You knew?
Yeah, but if I had told myself you need to do 2.5 years of pre-writing, I never would have done it. Never. I had to convince myself that it was true. Like we do all this all the time. We convince ourselves of something. We know it's really not true.
But you believed in yourself with this dog book. How come you believe so strongly? And you fired your first. You really believe strong. I mean, you went through a long time.
That I can't answer. I don't know. Look, the miracle of whatever. Sometimes.
That's amazing.
No, I mean, it's a wonderful thing when that happens. When one drops in like that. That's a nugget. That came in. Others I've had to work for. So it's just, you don't know. You never know. But anyway, thank you all for coming.